Hello, everybody, and welcome to this very, very special Signal Hour. This is an extra edition. Normally, these come out on Wednesday. Today, we're doing it Monday. It's Inauguration Day, and we have so much to cover because not only did we have an inauguration, we have a peaceful transfer of power, which did happen. Some very interesting things that Trump said, but these last-minute pardons by Biden are really hard to take, and I'm worried that they're very destructive. And so we're going to talk about those because this is absolutely fully unacceptable. I think we've just been exposed to the degree to which this Biden family has been a crime syndicate, and now they're busy just pardoning themselves. Yes, themselves, including the Biden family. We'll get into all of that in just a second. So, Signal Hour, welcome to this. What am I trying to do here? Trying to figure out what is going on in the world, finding the signal within the signal. X, or Twitter, formerly Twitter, is actually my number one news source, bar none, because I get to hear what people are thinking without the overlord filters, without the narrative reinforcing structures by the media, which has somehow lost the plot and unable to comport themselves with what I'd call minimal dignity and common sense. So we've had 4 long, terrible years of not being able to say what we think is true, not being able to discuss things openly, such as, is it possible for more people to vote in a district than actually live there? No. But you haven't been able to talk about that because you were an election denier. We haven't been able to talk about COVID openly because you were a medical denier, all that stuff, right? All that junk. Now, in his inaugural address, Trump said that he's doing away with the government will no longer be involved in censoring free speech. So I guess there's going to be a lot of people at CISA and some of these other agencies that are going to have to be out there figuring out what they're going to be doing next in life, dusting those resumes off as they suddenly have to find productive things to do with their lives. I know it's going to be a shock to many of them. So here with the Signal Hour, this is live. I'm going to be monitoring over here. And by the way, some of you with sharp eyes will notice it's not my regular studio. I'm here in the studio of Paul Kiker of Kiker Wealth Management. You've seen me interviewing him on the other side of this if you've been watching Finance U. Now I'm in this chair, so try not to create any confusion. That's what I'm here to do. So, hey, Savannah here, Paul Brownstein, good to see you. And Fauci pardoned all of Biden's family. So this is, let me, before we get to the hopefulness of, I think, Trump said many things that resonated strongly for me in terms of bringing back America first, he talked about the absolutely deplorable state of America right now, not having a secure border. So he's first thing he's going to do is secure that. He said yesterday in his convention, one of the very first things he's going to do is commute or pardon all the J6ers. So we'll find out if that's true in the next few minutes here. And he also talked about how he's going to recreate a sense of patriotism, that it's America first. What happened in Western North Carolina, abandoning those people, was absolutely, completely unacceptable. And it is, and it should be. Sending hundreds of billions of dollars to help Ukraine do what it's going to do. He was poking his finger right in the eye of the prior administration. What was fascinating, we're going to be reviewing this tape in the full Signal Hour that comes up on Wednesday, the usual one, because what's fascinating is hearing what was said, what was not said, but watching the reactions. You saw that sitting behind the dais. So Trump's here, and there's people, if you're in Trump's position, people to his stage left, as you're facing Trump, to his right, you saw Obama over there, you saw George W. Bush, the lesser over there, you saw Kamala and Biden, you saw Jill, you saw all that. Didn't see Michelle Obama, kind of interesting moment there. But you saw a lot of people on that side, and many of them did not stand when Trump was talking about things that everybody else was pretty excited about. And I think we very clearly got to see who represents the deep state, who was not standing for America, who was part of the absolute disastrous run of the last 4 years. Biden, I think, is going to go down in history as the most destructive president possibly ever. Because yes, a civil war is a very destructive thing, but there was a possibility of uniting after that. What Biden did, Team Biden, is they did some of the most destructive, corrosive things they could. They split families asunder. They divided us. He said he was going to be a great uniter, and that was the thing he was going to try and fix post-Trump. And of course, he did the exact opposite of that, because that's who Biden actually is. And everybody who surrounded him, they were the most destructive, most corrosive people. And Trump talked pretty extensively about how he was a target of the lawfare. He's going to end the lawfare. The Department of Justice is going to get back to being a Department of Justice, administering constitutional law. That great. Well, as he talked about that, let's keep in mind, and I've presented this many times to my subscribers in the past, over 400 people have been charged under the DOJ lawfare. Right here, I happen to be in Georgia at the moment. We can talk about this now, right? I guess. That Fani Willis, in conspiring with Merrick Garland, charged lots and lots of people with election interference here in the state of Georgia for daring to do things like say, hey, did you see this video of people stuffing ballots through the machines 2 and 3 times? Hey, what was about those sprinklers breaking at 2 in the morning and, all of that? And then people got charged for that. Lawyers, former attorney generals, right? Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, right? Et cetera, et cetera. It wasn't just Trump. They weaponized lawfare against a lot of people. So that brings us to the Biden pardons, because Biden is very concerned now, or his handlers, because I don't know what Biden actually is concerned with. He made it without tripping and falling, shuffling into the rotunda there today. Count that as a victory, I guess. But why was Biden suddenly in the last hours, and we were all afraid this was going to come, right? That he was going to pardon some of the worst of the worst right in the last bitter moments, and he did. So let's talk about this. Let me go there now. I want to get to these pardons because this is absolutely, well, I think Brenda's got this exactly right. This is sickening. This is really sickening what just happened. I consider it completely unacceptable. And I agree Trump needs to find a way, Marky Farky, great, to charge Biden with impersonating the 46th president. That's okay, good. I like that. By doing that, he could undo all of Biden's actions while falsely pretending to be 46th president. Is that possible? You know what? Maybe. Let's talk about this, because in order, the way I read it, and here's the fun thing I love about reading the Constitution, I can read it and understand it. There's no like 6,000 page whereas replacing paragraph 3, notwithstandings tucked in there to violate everything and obviate everything that came before. I can read it, and so can you. And there is some language in there about a president being able to pardon people. Okay. But when you read it, it clearly says the president. It doesn't say the president's staff. It doesn't say if the president is mentally incapacitated, his staff can just make stuff up anytime they want. It has no provisions for that. If it can be shown that the president was not mentally capable of executing and conceiving of and executing and fully understanding those particular pardons, well, then I don't think they're valid. So there's that. So we're going to talk about that, but let's start here. So first, I wake up this morning and find out that Biden pardoned not just Fauci, but General Milley and the January 6th committee staffers. Ooh. And so let's explore this, because here's the language that was used. He said here, that is why, quote, I am exercising my authority, that's sole authority, my meaning the individual, under the Constitution, my authority, not, of course, doesn't mean the general authority of random staffers around me, some of them in their 30s who've never held a proper job in their lives. None of that. He meant my sole authority under the Constitution to, quote, pardon General Mark A. Milley, Dr. Anthony S. Fauci, and members of Congress and staff who served on the Select Committee and the U.S. Capitol and DC Metro police officers who testified before the Select Committee. I'm no legal expert, no legal beagle, but I'm like, why would the U.S. Capitol and DC Metro Police need a pardon? Because a pardon, to be clear, a pardon is given to people who are guilty of something. In fact, the way you and I would understand a pardon colloquially would be people who have been charged with a crime, been convicted of a crime, have shown appropriate remorse for that crime, might, under the clemency of the presidency of the United States, be granted a mercy. That's what a pardon should be. You and I, you have to really dig hard to find any examples through history where suddenly people have been given blanket immunity for a crime that they haven't yet admitted to, haven't yet been convicted of. And as we dig into this, we're going to find out it's even more sickening than that. Okay. Carrying on, quote, this part's really interesting to me. The issuance of these pardons should not be mistaken as an acknowledgement that any individual engaged in any wrongdoing. No, of course not. Why would you assume that somebody getting a pardon for something would in any way acknowledge or represent that an individual may have engaged in any wrongdoing. Strike it from your mind. Like, how could that possibly come to your mind? Carrying on, quote, nor should acceptance be misconstrued as an admission of guilt for any offense. Really? Here's the thing. If you tried to pardon me for something, Chris, we're going to pardon you for your role in 9/11. I would refuse that pardon because by accepting the pardon, I would be admitting I had something to do with 9/11, and I know I didn't. So I would not be accepting any pardons for something I know I didn't do. So obviously, you can misconstrue that. Like, listen, if you give somebody a pardon, they're like, dude, thanks, I'll take it. They know they're guilty, or they're afraid of something. And what is that they might be afraid of? Well, they're going to be afraid of this part. This part is crazy. I just picked a random picture of Biden representing who I think he actively is. That's from his speech he gave at Independence Hall there, and I don't know who set that up, but that was the most my Führer talk ever given ever by a president, both in U.S. president, in terms of both the language used and the setting chosen. And then later they're like, oh, we didn't know that the blue then white then red was only going to show the red behind him. We didn't think about the frame of the president in the picture. Like, how could we do that? That would require somebody to actually understand how technology works or how a camera works or have any sense of setting the setting. Like, they're trying to pretend like you're making too much of that we framed him in this like highly let's just call it what it is. That's a Nazi frame right there. Full on. I mean, that is exactly Mein Führer sort of a moment there. But he said, get this, quote, this was in the context, this is a paragraph pulled from that Fauci, Milley, and the January 6th committee people. This is a quote from that statement that came out on the whitehouse.gov. He said, quote, I believe in the rule of law. Oh, let me stop right there. If you believed in the rule of law, then you wouldn't believe that it would be necessary for somebody who was innocent of anything to need to be protected from being charged for things that they were innocent about. The only reason you would say, I believe in the rule of law, but everything that follows afterwards means you can ignore the thing that came before the but, right? He believes in the rule of law, but he's very concerned that these things might happen, where he said, and quote, I am optimistic that the strength of our legal institutions will ultimately prevail over politics. But these are exceptional circumstances. And what would these exceptional circumstances be exactly? Obviously, these exceptional circumstances include the idea that over 400 people have been charged with political crimes under the Biden administration. That is exceptional. I admit. It's just like you're worried that your successor is going to do the same things that you did. That's all I can think. So he said, but these are exceptional circumstances, and I cannot in good conscience do nothing, right? Baseless and politically motivated investigations wreak havoc on the lives, safety, and financial security of targeted individuals and their families. Well, of course they do. We have grandmothers who prayed in prison right now. We've had people who've been shot to death by the ATF and FBI kicking down their doors because they violated some form filling thing that they didn't do. We have people whose lives have been upended, up to and including Trump's, for being your political adversaries. Not just your political adversaries, but dare I say this, the ideological adversaries of this particular horrifying past 4-year government that we've been under. I have been censored, but I'm not going to make this about me in this, but it happened. So I'm familiar with it. I know what it's like. I'm still getting censored under YouTube to this day. I get it, right? It's not a bastion of free speech. Oh, Chris, they're a private company, right? No, not when that private company gets big fat federal contracts, not when that private company's ongoing operation and not being torn apart as a criminal monopoly is subject to the government looking the other way, not when that government, that agency is tied in deep with the government, has a revolving door with the same government officials. That's not a private company anymore. We didn't have that. So along with that, we had over 400 people that I know about whose lives were torn apart in exactly the way Biden is saying right here, or Team Biden. It's not Biden, obviously. I don't think he can compose three of these sentences if you gave him a half a day. Right now, he's obviously mentally out to lunch, but whoever has been operating the presidency, I think, in an illegal and illicit manner, right? Obviously, the presidency has a huge amount of power invested within it, can do things like executive orders and tell the DOJ to not do this and conduct lawfare against those people there. It can do enormous damage, and therefore the buck has to stop here, as they say. And that means that it's invested in a single individual, man or woman. By the way, under Trump's inaugural address, he said, by the way, the federal government will hereby recognize that there are only two genders. So man or woman in the office. So I think I can say that again now. And that person then has extraordinary power. But what if that person's mentally incapacitated and people who were never voted for, never elected, are then running all of this policy and dictating how the weapons of state, be those anti-free speech, be those weaponization of lawfare, be those whatever's going on, not having a secure border, deciding to slow roll the response efforts in Western North Carolina because we don't care about those people because they're either too poor or of the wrong political persuasion for us to legit care about, or they're the wrong color, whatever their ideology was. This administration has been conducting lawfare against people. And so he's scared about that. And he said, oh, I know really well, whoever wrote this, we know that the financial security of targeted individuals and their families, their lives can be upended. We understand that really well because that's what we've been doing for 4 years. So now we think it would be unfair to us if those same tactics if that roving spotlight came back and those tactics were used against us. We think that would be completely unfair to us. But that's because these people lack any shred of dignity, any shred of remorse, any shred of humanity, any shred of what I recognize as being part of being good citizens of the country and good citizens to each other. Look, politics is bare knuckle brawling. I get that. This isn't politics. That's not what this is. This is people who just weaponized a system against their ideological and political enemies and probably financial enemies. Anybody who wasn't like putting money in their pocket and saying the right things was their enemy at this point. And that included most of Americans. Right? Remember when they tried hard to, like, even in this speech that I'm referring to with this particular picture right here at Independence Hall there with Biden with his red background, he was talking about there's far too many MAGA Americans, and he demonized them and said MAGA Americans are like the worst things ever, and they're like Nazis. Like he said all that, like some of the most horrifying things I've ever heard coming out of a president until these words that we're about to talk about, until these pardons. This guy, worst, most destructive, most illegitimate president in all of history. Illegitimate on the way in and all the way through, because I don't think he had the mental faculties to execute faithfully the office. And I think everybody involved in that deception needs to be hauled up and held to account. Right? So if I was gonna, run for president, my platform would be very simple. I'd have one plank. Consequences. They're not just for little people anymore. Because if you or I get in trouble, you miss a decimal point, your CPA miscalculates something out of the 75,000 pages of IRS code, you and me, we get in trouble. But these people, they do some crazy stuff and then they just pardon themselves. It's one of the most socially destructive things you could possibly do. Now, why is that? Because law is since the twin pillars of Hammurabi, right? When we had the first time that humans kind of got to a scale of organization and living, that we needed to start writing some stuff down because we couldn't just trust each other, because we knew each other, because we were living in small communities where the Dunbar number of 150 relations could still hold sway. Once you got past that, you got to write stuff down. And then one of the very first things on those twin spirals of fairness and reciprocity, one of the first things coded down was an eye for an eye, right? That was served as justice for a while, meaning that if you did something, you should suffer the same fate as the person or thing you did that to. So when we talk about Fauci, we talk about the fact that he ran illegal gain of function experiments. We talk about the fact that those experiments either accidentally or intentionally got away from the keepers of those experiments. that then went out across the world and ostensibly killed millions of people. And instead of admitting that, like, oops, my bad, let's try and make this right, the first thing Fauci did, his very first official act that we can find in his trains, starting right there in late January of 2020, some of the first things Fauci did was to conspire to cover up the lab origin and then do everything he could to ram pharmaceutical solutions while blocking any other possible solutions, while lying about masks, while lying about social distancing, while pretending that safe and effective were actual words you could use when he knew better. Those are the things that Joe Biden thinks would be unfortunate if anybody took a peek at. So that's exceptionally corrosive because, again, there's both the appearance of law and then there's the reality of the law. Both of those things, those twin pillars, again, fairness and reciprocity, are the social twin pillars that hold up the structure of our society. And what holding up the structure of law that keeps that society stable is both the appearance and the reality of that fairness. Yeah. All right. So he said, quote, carrying on, even when individuals have done nothing wrong, and in fact, they have done the right thing and will ultimately be exonerated, the mere fact of being investigated or prosecuted can ruin reputations and finances. You don't say. Hmm. Hmm. How about that? Don Tabi. Anyway, however you pronounce that. Accountability, integrity, honesty. Less elevator talk on Inauguration Day. It's all story time. We need to get back to the basic things. Integrity and honesty. That's where we need to go. And if we don't get back to that, I have high hopes, and I'm also pretty realistic about where we're at. So let's carry on with these pardons. So let's just be absolutely clear. This irreparable damage he's talking about has already happened. The only way I can view this particular statement right now is that what Biden is saying is we're afraid that the things we just did for 4 years, those same tools might be turned back against us. He's not saying, hey, I'm 100% sure these people are not guilty of anything. He's not saying any of that stuff. He's just clearly saying, or his handlers are clearly saying, we're a little scared now that stuff we've been doing to other people, that it might come back to us. Hey, eye for an eye. They're afraid of that. They're afraid of the idea that they themselves might be held accountable for the things that they have done. Well, my friends, that's exactly right. They should be. Because without accountability, without consequences, you just get more of the same. If Trump goes forward and somehow does that whole thing, which I know DC loves to do, which is say, well, it's all water under the bridge and we're going to make a better future going forward. And, let's just look forward, not backwards. If he gives us that song and dance, it means that we're going to get the same thing, which is more of the same. We're not going to get any changes. There has to be accountability, not just for little people. We've got to need more accountability. So, all right, well, let's go back a bit. So this is the pardon of Fauci. So why January 1st, 2014? There's that date again. He also pardoned his son back to January 1st, 2014. There's nothing like this. You can search all the historical records you want. There's nothing like this in the pardon history. Maybe there is, but I couldn't find it. This idea that you pardon somebody for a specific crime that they've already been convicted of, and it's very specific. So I would say my position here would be, look, if we're going to be pardoning for, say, Fauci, we would say, okay, Fauci, we're going to pardon you, but here's the thing. You have to get on a stand and you have to tell us the things we're pardoning you for. And if you forget to tell us about something, then we didn't pardon you for that, right? Because I can't imagine a scenario where you would want to blanket pardon somebody for anything, right? What if it turns out that you pardoned him and it turned out that he'd somehow stolen all your family's wealth, right? That would be awkward. Like, I didn't think I was pardoning you for that. Like, Fauci should have to get on a stand under oath and explain everything that he did with it was a crime. And then Biden could say, well, I'm pardoning for that. This whole idea of like, I pardon you for anything from January 1st, 2014, which, by the way, when you do the math, January 1st, 2014 to 15 to 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, all the way through 24 to January 1st, 2025. 11 years? That's oddly specific, don't you think? Why January 1st, 2014? So now, as you know, inquiring minds are going to start asking, okay, what do we have to look for in 2014? Because something happened back then, right? So Defiant L's put this up. I got this from Jicky Leaks, who retweeted this. Thank you both. But why is Fauci's pardon from 2014? Does anybody here know? Does anybody like just throw it in a comment if you have an idea? This is suspicious. Totally sus. This thing happening. But my point here is that Fauci should have to, or anybody who's getting a blanket pardon, they should have to stand up and explain what they're getting pardoned for. It can't be everything. It just can't be. Mass murder probably doesn't count. Treason probably doesn't count. I know that it's a little vague and looks overly broad, and the Constitution says, well, you can sort of pardon anybody for anything, I guess. But it has to be in the context of a specific crime, doesn't it? This is interesting. It's a possibility. The Maidan coup, right? So remember Yanukovych of Ukraine, then the president, he didn't sign the European Association Agreement in December of 2013, and then we had the Maidan coup in 2014. This is when the whole Ukrainian disaster kicked off, was 2014. So that's a possibility. Okay. I don't know if this is true or not, but we should look at when the Moderna COVID vax patent was. When did that come out? Tradesman also, guessing that that's when the biowork moved to Ukraine. Okay, that could be. I don't know if that's actually when that moved there or not. We're gonna have this is now officially a curiosity. We're going back to what happened in 2014. WTF 2014 question mark. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, and we'll show the rest of this roar. You're right. All pardons do lead to 2014. So anyway, this is totally unacceptable. Again, let's review. So Fauci, by the way, if you haven't read The Real Anthony Fauci by RFK Jr., you should. Turns out that, killing a lot of people with COVID administrations wasn't Fauci's first rodeo at the mass murder game, right? Under the gay movement, looking at what he did under the context of HIV, right? Killed a lot of people with AZT while blocking, very familiar story, other things that were actually shown to positively work. And he was instrumental in that whole mass murdery fiasco. Right, so that goes way back to the 80s. So maybe he can't be. Maybe he could still be held to account for that. I don't know. Is this when Obama's administration banned gain-of-function research? I don't think so. 2017 is what comes to mind for when he evaded it. But when was it banned? That might have been a temporary moratorium. You're right, ECM Dig. We should look into that. I think that's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have. This has something to do with Ukraine. It has something to do with gain of function. It has something to do with that, I think. So we're going to have to look at that. All right, carrying on. Well, Senator Johnson, of course, asking the right question. We're all thinking it, right? I wonder what criminal activity is concerned by that would need a pardon from. What exactly is this? So everybody's thinking it. It obviously it stinks to high heaven. It's totally, completely unacceptable. I think the most generous interpretation, the only one I can come up with, is that Biden wanted to prevent Trump from acting like Biden. Right? That's it. Preemptive pardons to guard against Trump's reprisals. Well, you wouldn't need to guard against reprisals if you hadn't done something in the first place, because the root of that word reprisal means that something has happened and you're doing something in response to that. How could you have a reprisal to something that hadn't happened? Wouldn't work. Even the New York Times is having trouble shifting the language around to make this make sense. But this is absolutely full stop, completely disgusting, 100%. That man right there, Anthony Fauci. So let me review you a little history here very quickly. Yeah. So COVID's happening, right? And so we know now from the early email releases that the only thing Fauci was really focused on was not finding, a way to help people survive. right? We knew from the Event 201 planning that what they really cared about, if you ever watch any of the Event 201, which is that October of 2019 event where you had Gina Haspel there from the National Security Council, and you had heads of various media institutions and pharmaceutical companies, and they were talking about what would happen hypothetically if a COVID virus broke out and created a COVID pandemic, even though we'd never had a coronavirus pandemic in all of human history. You're like, what if we had one? And then we had one. So inquiring minds are like, well, that's a little awkwardly convenient. And in the context of that, what was really awkward for me was observing all the things that they talked about. And there were all these different war games they ran. Not one of those concerned itself with how do we help the most people survive? Like that wasn't part of the war gaming. The war gaming was controlling the narrative and how do we combat vaccine hesitancy because we'll need people to take what we want them to take right away, and how do we make sure that we can silence dissident doctors who are saying the wrong thing. So anyway, that was Event 201, right? And in the context of that, we come into Fauci finding out that this thing has now erupted across the world. And the first thing he does in January of 2020 is get together with Jeremy Farrar of the Wellcome Trust and with Christian Anderson of Scripps Institute and all these outside non-NIH, non-NIAID, non-US government people to figure out how to frame this to say that this came from nature, right? So instead of warning the world, this would have been Anthony Fauci in a non-mass murdery sort of a role. He would have said, look, there's this coronavirus and there were some experiments. They were doing them for a variety of reasons. This was a recombinant virus that was really, honestly, we're up to our eyeballs in it because Ralph Baric out of UNC was one of the original people, and he helped a lot with the techniques, and they did some stuff. Maybe they shouldn't have, but it came out, and now this is a whether you call it weaponized or not, this is a virus that we have no native experience with. We are naive hosts. This thing is brand new. It's a chimera. It's got little Franken pieces from all these different coronaviruses that we stapled together, and oops, it got out. It was, maybe we shouldn't have run this in a BSL-2 lab. Maybe we should have run this in a more secure lab if you're going with the accidental release story, but it happened. So now we're going to have to just try everything because we have no experience with this. Well, not true. We also had experience with SARS, and we also knew that hydroxychloroquine actually worked against SARS. And we also know some things, and we know some basics, right? Which is that you can't stop a respiratory virus with people standing 6 feet apart, right? Et cetera. He could have come out and said, look, this is an accident. We're going to make the most of it. And here's what we do. He didn't do any of that. He spent his entire first months just trying to cover this up and muddy the waters to say it could have been natural organ. It could have been a pangolin and a bat, which don't live near each other, but they got together. They had a little bit of an orgy, and then they were near a human. And then that human somehow got involved in that, whatever's happening. And then the human passed it on to other humans. Like it was just stupid, right? Obviously, to anybody looking at it at the time. So they did all of that. And then it was early in that whole cycle where they had this remdesivir trial running because they really wanted this Gilead Biosciences thing that, they'd already tried it during some other viral outbreaks and it didn't work. In fact, it was terrible. It caused high levels of death from kidney failure, but maybe that was kidney failure because we were trying it on the Ebola virus. Maybe this time it won't cause kidney failure. So they put together this trial, and then here's the way a trial works. You decide what the endpoints are going to be. In this case, did people live or die? That was the endpoint, right? Did more people die or not under this thing? And therefore, you would say if more people lived than died, this stuff was helpful. So here's what you do when you're doing a trial. You set it up, you define your endpoints, and then you don't peek at the data until it's all done, right? They broke all those rules. Not only did they peek at the data early, but they changed the endpoints midstream. And they said, oh, the endpoint we care about now is less days in the ICU. So I remember that. Fauci came out and said, oh, we've had very exciting returns from the remdesivir. And I was shocked when I heard it at the time. And I had a whole episode about it. I'm like, you don't do that. You don't break the trial midstream and peek at it and then fish around in there. And here's it was so crazy. It wasn't like everybody got remdesivir, spent less time in the ICU. It was only the people who had it got it for 5 days, not the people who got it for 10 days. Apparently taking it for longer was not good. So only the people who took it for 5 days. And then only the people who were getting this much oxygen flow, but not this much. So they took this little tiny window out of the center of the data and said, oh, there's our positive signal. And then they gave it to everybody. And the CDC came forward and FDA and said, oh, now this is approved for everybody eventually down to 6 months of age. and they had no data. This was the most grotesque thing I've ever seen. That's Anthony Fauci. That's who we're talking about. That's the person who just got this blanket immunity. Okay. That's who we're talking about, just to remind everybody. Well, and it goes on from there, right? So it turns out that just hours, or maybe even an hour, maybe the last thing he signed before waddling into the rotunda was Biden signing this document here. Let's get some handwriting analysts on that, make sure that's even him, because it's not clear that he resigned from the last campaign all on his own. Is that the same signature? Not clear. Anyway, he then pardons his whole family. Most importantly, Jim Biden, because Jim Biden is at the heart of this whole thing, right? This is what it looks like when you have a criminal enterprise running the show. Whoever in all of his this is history being made, folks. Take a screenshot. There it is. For the first time in U.S. history, a seated president has decided that what he really needed most was to pardon his entire family. Yep. As Maya Angelou said, when somebody shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Well, this is who they are. They just showed you his entire family apparently needed a special clemency dispensation. Not because they're guilty. Heavens no, we wouldn't want anybody to be making that association. How dare you? I'm pardoning them because they're obviously innocent, right? Clearly. Again from 2014. Why 2014? This is getting really curious. I can't wait to dig in. And of course, this is the power of, this is why they're afraid of things like TikTok. This is why they're afraid of things like X. This is why Elon Musk is demonized amongst this crew. Okay. They're demonized amongst this crew because, well, they allow us to actually form our own thoughts and talk and research and look into things. So we're going to be digging in, all of us collectively here. I welcome all your support. Anything you find, anything I find, let's do this. Why 2014? Now we're going to have to look back at the Obama presidency. If I'm Obama, I'm pissed about this because now he just got dragged right back into the limelight. I bet he was hoping to sort of gray out into the distance and go down as a revered character. Obviously not anymore, because now we're going to have to see what happened in 2014. I don't know why any particular, and if the 2014 may just be a smokescreen to protect somebody. It might have been to protect Hunter, and they're like, well, kind of open that can of worms. Maybe we just keep going with the 2014 thing for everybody. I guess. I don't know. Yeah, that's right, Brenda. We are falling down that rabbit hole of corruption, and we've really got to we're gonna have to really burrow in and find out what was down there. Yeah, this is rather difficult to interpret any other way, and yeah, me too. Bayou Gardner here. How many got pardoned and got the clemency? And by the way, these are bad. But remember, in the first batch, one of the people that Biden felt really deserved special dispensation was that judge from Pennsylvania, who not just ruined adolescents' lives, but some of them committed suicide, so that he could get kickbacks by taking kids accused of minor things, throwing the book at them, ramming them into this youth, jail or whatever it was, supposed to be some rehabilitation program, but it was just cruel and torture and ruin their lives so that he could get a few kickbacks. That's the kind of person Biden sat down. His team was like, who really deserves a clemency is somebody who abuses children for money. How on point is that? That's almost as dark as watching Jill Biden come out for Halloween in a panda costume. And if you know what I'm talking about, I'm sorry. The rest of you, don't look into it. It's absolutely not something you want in your head. But that's what we've been up to here. So there can't be any way to sort of move past this. This is a national hairball that we're going to have to choke up. These people have to be held to account. They have to. Or the twin pillars that hold up society don't apply. It doesn't matter anymore. Why should you follow the law? Why should I follow the law? Why should anybody follow the law if these people can do things that we know led to mass murder, right? Murder is an intentional act. I'm going to do something that I know kills somebody it is considered an act of murder. Fauci did things that intentionally led to, and many other people under him as well, that did things that led to deaths intentionally. Now, what's interesting is Biden didn't seem to have enough time to scrawl out pardons for everybody working under Fauci. So now we have all of his underlings. We have all the people working at the NIH who, from Francis Collins on down, also not named here. Kind of interesting. Rochelle Walensky at the CDC, not named. Kind of interesting. And I've seen the point made that now that he has blanket immunity, in essence, Fauci can be called in front of Congress and he now has to testify. He can't plead the fifth anymore. I don't know if technically, legally, how they would wrangle that, but he's now going to have to just say, I don't know, I don't remember the whole time. But they can force him to testify about things now, and he can't plead the fifth. So I don't know how that plays out. Or I think what Trump does here is he just undoes all of these and says, yep, you're going to have to prove to me that these were done either not under duress or by a president who was fully capable and competent. And if you want to prove that competency, we're going to have to get Joe up here on the stand and we're going to start grilling him. And I think we all know how that would go. That would be like the debate, only 10 times worse. And then you could make the case that it wasn't the president who granted the clemency. It wasn't the president who made these decisions. And then they get undone because they need to be undone. These people need to be investigated and then cleared like any normal person if they're not guilty of something. So John Strand, who I believe was one of the J6 people, victims out there, said Mark Milley is literally a traitor who caused the J6 violence. He did have a hand in that, I hear. Fauci's Dr. Evil, guilty of mass genocide. Liz Cheney violated, the very 20-year felony she supported being used to put this guy and hundreds of others in prison. Scandal of the century. So, yeah, primordial bliss. We're gonna start. I think 2014. I think a lot of darkness comes out of Ukraine right around that time. So everybody involved in that, we're gonna have to rip that Band-Aid off and take a peek and see what was going on there. Yeah. Adam Smith and Rousseau turning in their graves. It's that disturbing. Yeah, I agree with that. Century, crime of the century. Yeah, more like ever. 2014 was the year that coronavirus was invented at Chapel Hill. Could be. Yep. John Baxter writing a true violation of the social contracts. Exactly. So that's really important because, again, it's the appearance as well as the reality of fairness in law that actually gives law its power. If you strip one or both of those away, well, you don't have law anymore. And our social contracts are not written down. They're not written contracts, but they're really important. And some of the enduring social contracts we think we have here in the United States includes the idea that there's meritocracy, there's fairness, hard work is rewarded, things like that. That's just got shredded. I mean, it's really, it took me a while to process this. I was prepared, but I guess not totally prepared to wake up to read about the Fauci, Milley, J6, Biden family stuff. I knew it was a possibility, so I was prepared on that level. But I wasn't ready for just the jarringness of that, just how socially shocking this is. Because what it basically says is we don't have social contracts anymore. You can do anything you want, up to and including mass murder. And that's going to be okay, as long as you're on team corruption. Yeah, that's not how any of this works. It's a hop, skip, and a jump from there to a completely ruined, destroyed society. That marks kind of like a watermark, and everything is downhill from there, which is why, Trump came out and, he said some things in his inaugural address. I wish he talked about this more directly, but he did mention that, all the stuff that's been bad, like, not caring for Americans, not having a border, all this crazy silliness going on where the military has to concern itself with things besides defending the nation as priorities, etc. He really did take the last administration while they were sitting there, threw them under the bus. Now, what's fascinating, again, watch the tape carefully. Watch all the things that those people, as you're facing Trump, the people to your right, but as Trump would be speaking, people to his left, all the people seated over there. That's your deep state rogues gallery right there. Everything they didn't stand for tells you everything you need to know about them. 100%, full stop. Just nasty, nasty folks. So think about everything that we just had to put up with here post-election, right? So Trump's elected. Immediately thereafter, we have to put up with, they nearly started World War III. Who remembers that? I do. I know you do, right? They started lobbing long-range missiles into Russia, and Russia had said, that's our bright red line. And thankfully, it wasn't that bright or red of a line. Russia decided to absorb, those insults, I think, waiting for Trump to get in office, right? One of the more important things Trump said in his inauguration speech is he wants the government, he wants the military, to be strong and powerful again, specifically so that we don't get into wars going forward, right? That the measure of success of having a well-built military is that you don't get into wars. I agree with that completely. So we nearly got dragged into World War III, and I think we only didn't because Putin and other people in Russia sat down and looked at this and said, we just have to make it to January 20th. And then we can be done with whoever these people are. And we're going to have more conversations about who these people are, because it's not Biden. We're going to be tempted as humans to assign blame to a specific face. It wasn't him. It was all the people surrounding him and all the people in the media who enabled this, right? And all the people who were in support of all that stuff that had been done. So let me put it this way. If you, at one point in time, admired Fauci, if you're a doctor, say, listening to this, if at some point in time you thought he was just doing the best he could, okay, that's fine. You got duped, okay? To the people who were supporting Fauci because they kind of knew what he was up to, or they should have known better what he was up to, and they supported it anyway. If you were the kind of person who supported Fauci having grandma die alone in, through a glass wall, trying desperately to reach, her family as she died alone, if you supported that, if you supported masking children and retarding their development cycle, and I'm using that word very specifically, if you were in any way, shape, or form for forcing people into being part of a medical experiment that they didn't want to be part of, and you know that, and you were still for that, yeah, there's social consequences, but there's a spiritual consequence for that. You made your decision. You're part of that team. You're part of the baddies, okay? I'm not talking to you. You guys are lost. That's between you and God going forward. But for the people who are duped, hey, it happens, right? Listen, you have to operate a society on trust. Okay, if you were duped, now you just get to go, okay, not only am I going to reject that duping, I'm going to say, wow, I guess I got that wrong. And that's a little bit of an ego ding, but I'm a trusting person. So that's how I make sense of it. So you're duped. Fine. Understand that there are many other dupings going on right now. And your job is not to just protect yourself against what happened with the Fauci duping, but all the other ones that they're running, all these other pieces that we're running right now. How we have treated the people of North Carolina is a national disgrace. How we treated the people after the Lahaina fire is a national disgrace. How we allowed our country to be overrun, not with immigrants. Remember, I make this point over and over again. It's not about immigrants. My grandparents were immigrants. Immigration is a 70-box multi-year process. It's a very tricky gauntlet to get through. Not talking about that. I'm talking about illegal migrants, people who are migrating en masse, like a flock of birds, from a low resource area to a high resource area. A country without a border is not a country. There are people out there, there are entities out there who have been actively seeking to destroy the country. And that is the larger lens through which I see the things that the Biden administration has done. This last thing, these pardons, on the surface, they're unacceptable and gross. On the next level down, these things are actively corrosive. This is like the last, like Biden's a renter, Team Biden, they're renters that have been evicted from the house, and they're smearing feces on the wall and, unplugging the freezer full of meat in the basement. Like, that's who these people are. They're destructive. They hate the country. They don't like the people in the country. It's the only thing that makes sense to me is, and you can feel that it's coming from a group of people who, if they say, I'm an unhappy person and I don't know how to make myself happier, so I'm going to find people who are happy and I'm going to drag them down to my level. Like they become relatively happier with themselves by making other people unhappy because they don't know how to elevate themselves. They don't know how can I become a person of high integrity and moral character who's honestly revered and loved by the people around me? That sounds like hard work, because it is. They don't want that, right? So I think that's really what we've been seeing, is that there are people who hate the country and have no clue how to make it better. So their solution is to destroy the country. I mean, that's the only thing that really fits here. So it was so bad they tried to start World War III. Who remembers that? You remember they ran the whole New Jersey drone psyop on us all, like, oh, we don't know what these things are, but they're not dangerous, and just let that whole thing run. They did that. Pardoned people who abused children for profit. Just talked about that. I shouldn't say ran. They ran down the debt ceiling to literally zero for Trump's first day in office. So let me see if I can find this. This is oh my gosh. If you don't know about this, yeah, I'll find this real quick here. Pull this up. Yeah, this is. Let's see. Who would we? This is a total ticking time bomb. Yeah, I guess this is good enough. So let's start here. Pull this one off, and I'll put this on the stage. So it turns out, if you didn't know about this, this is astonishing. So we have this debt ceiling, and the Treasury Department does all these shenanigans to try and keep us under the debt ceiling, right? I'm sure they're stuffing invoices in the top left drawer of Janet's, desk there, and begging and borrowing and running down government pension programs to get a little extra cash. And wouldn't you know it? Surprise! Surprise! As Robert Bose says, Janet Yellen leaves U.S. Treasury in a huff. And it turns out that the debt ceiling expires on January 21st. We run out of money. We run out of maneuvering room. I mean, this is just a complete turd in the punch bowl. This is just the smoke grenade on the way out. Balaji talks about it as a time bomb. Cash spent all the way down. Extraordinary measures have begun. And who leaves Trump's first day in office this hot of a mess? Well, Janet Yellen does, because she's part of this team. And she's just history is going to record Janet Yellen as being one of the most odious, destructive characters ever. Don't fall for that kindly, bumbly grandmother act. This lady has done an immense amount of damage in her life. And so surprise, we have that fun to look forward to starting tomorrow. And then pardon Fauci, who conducted off-the-books gain-of-function research in a foreign country. When those experiments jumped the lab and caused a pandemic, his first order of business was to convene a cover-up, confab, and not help solve the problem at all, leading to many, many deaths and economic destruction, and one of the largest transfers of wealth we've ever seen. And then pardoned Milley. So if you don't know much about this story yet, there is something to learn there that is quite extraordinary. So it turns out that Mark Milley, he engaged in, probably, as DC Drano here says, some of the purest forms of treason known to the public. And this goes back a long way. He called China's military behind the president's back. So Trump is still president. He's been voted out of office, allegedly, in the 2020 elections. I say allegedly because, honestly, when you dig through the data, there's enough smoke there that you can actually see the flames clear as day. Something's absolutely wrong with that election. Full stop. Can prove it mathematically. It just is. So in that hubbub of Trump and January 6th, all of that, Milley took it upon himself. He called China's top general behind the president's back and said he would not attack China even if given the order by the president, the commander-in-chief, the CINC, and further said that he'd give him 24 hours notice if anything, like if he couldn't deliver on that promise. So that's a military coup, right? So command of the civilian command of the military is the distinguishing feature of our democracy. And I mean our democracy, not the our democracy that these people got all wrapped up in. This full stop, this right here was one of the most extraordinary things to ever happen. A U.S. general called what I would consider probably our chief military rival in the world and said, don't worry about it. Whatever the civilians think of, I don't care. You and I will work this out. So he said something happened that was so important. He's like, I have to assume command of of the U.S. military. That's what happened. He assumed command. And then nothing happened. Like, how does that happen? This is the craziest thing ever. So let's go into this a little bit more. This is from an article written about this whole scenario. And Milley said, quote, everyone in this room, whether you're a cop, whether you're a soldier, we're going to have to stop these guys meaning the people who showed up in Washington to say, hey, we would like to petition the government for redress. We're going to show up and voice our displeasure. What was obviously a corrupt and fraudulent election, right? Which is their right as citizens. But we're going to have to stop these guys, he said. We're going to put a ring of steel around this city, and the Nazis aren't getting in. So during Biden's inauguration, this should have told us everything. I don't know if you saw this, but if you did, you probably remember this. They closed the whole city down. There was obviously there's COVID, so that was part of the rationale. But really, you saw 20,000 guard troops, fences, razor wire, bollards, and when you looked at the actual inauguration, there were perhaps 300 people at it, tops. So when you see a peaceful transfer of power effectuated in part with Milley's help, which looks like only a few hundred people after a highly disputed and disputable election with razor wire and machine guns protecting the whole proceeding, it's kind of hard not to come away with this with a coup sort of a feel off of that, because that's what it was. All right. At Biden's swearing in on January 20th here, quote, Milley was seated behind, let me go back here, former President Barack Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama, who asked the general how he was feeling. No one has a bigger smile today than I do, he replied. You can see it under my mask. So he's openly partisan and he's delusional. Nazis? So he fell victim to or believed in or was a participant in or a perpetuator of the delusion that everybody who had a concern about this highly questionable election was a Nazi. Oh, right? That's something like full stop. You don't want to see that in somebody in the military. You definitely don't want to see it in the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and you definitely don't want to see it in the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff holding that particular delusion. You're either for the guy I like or you're a Nazi is a level of unsophisticated mental capability that you don't want to see in somebody like that. Right? All right. How about this? This is a Reichstag moment, Milley told aides. So the Reichstag burning down, of course, being one of the things that was used to usher Hitler into power. This is a Reichstag moment, right? The gospel of the Fuhrer. A spokesman for Milley declined to comment for this particular article. The portions of the book related to Milley, first reported Wednesday night by CNN in the book's July 20th release, offer a remarkable window into the thinking of America's highest ranking military officer who saw himself as one of the last empowered defenders of democracy during some of the darkest days of the country. Leave that aside. So that's the delusion. The delusion is I am standing as this bulwark between democracy and Trump. So he fell victim of Trump derangement syndrome, fell into this view that said Trump is the most dangerous thing ever. Anything I can do to stop him, of course, any means are justified by the ends, right? The end is we have to stop this guy. So whatever we have to do, if we have to lie, cheat, steal, run a coup, call up foreign generals, he fell victim to this delusion. So he was part of that Trump derangement syndrome, which just said anything that you need to do to stop Trump justifies everything. Okay. So that's part of the delusion. But full stop. Anybody who holds that particular delusion has fallen victim to what I consider to be weaponized psychological operations. Their circuitry got fried. Sam Harris, etc. All these people who just can't, Trump is the worst thing. We have to save our democracy, when what they're doing is destroying democracy to save our democracy. And by the way, their version of democracy is the one that only actually serves them, not the people of Western North Carolina, Lahaina, or anywhere else in this country. That's it. This is just the most obvious, transparent thing in the world. Their democracy is not actual democracy. Their democracy is totalitarian. Their democracy serves the few at the expense of the many. It's very difficult to detect how that's different from any other authoritarian regime in all of history. So, carrying on, after the failed insurrection on January 6th, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi called Milley to ask for his guarantee that Trump would not be able to launch a nuclear strike and start a war. This guy's crazy, Pelosi said of Trump, in what the book reported was mostly a one-way phone call. He's dangerous. He's a maniac. Once again, Milley sought to reassure, ma'am, I guarantee you that we have checks and balances in the system. Guarantee you. So she's worried. So he doesn't say, ma'am, you're nuts. Ma'am, this is crazy talk. Ma'am, what do you even mean? Right? He's dangerous. He's a maniac. So look, we already had 4 years of Trump. It's not like this was some unknown random guy who came up in a Reichstag moment and he's been saying fiery stuff about how we have to like do terrible things. You had 4 years of Trump. You had 4 years of the Trump presidency. And by the way, one of the things that Milley helped advance was this bogus idea, completely obviously bogus to everybody with a functioning set of brain cells, that the Russiagate thing was a complete hoax. I mean, obviously we had the data which said that this was a dossier was prepared by a company that was paid by Hillary Clinton's outfit, right? You know, we had tons of stuff to show that this was just patently fraudulently false. Anybody in Milley's position of authority who couldn't detect the fraud in that is obviously not fit for the job, incompetent. Or they believe in it and they perpetuate the fiction to undermine a seated president. That's treason. That's not the kind of stuff that you can sort of explain away within the military, because you either have civilian control of the military or you do not. Milley went outside of that and said, because Trump is so bad, we all agree with that. All us free-thinking, wonderful people who agree with our democracy, because he went down that particular delusional path, he broke the chain of command. And people are trying to shrug that off and explain it away and say, well, at least nothing bad happened, or he was deluded, but maybe now he gets it or something. No, one does not simply fail that badly in one's job. That's a pilot landing at the wrong airport. I mean, it's just a level of negligence. It's like, sorry, not this profession isn't well suited for you, or vice versa. All right. At any rate, carrying on. So now let's talk about, why would he be talking about China? I'm going to land this whole plane myself here talking about this last bit, which is the TikTok portion, because this actually is, I think, fairly defining and applies with the rest of the story. It fits. This isn't a complete cul-de-sac moment. So Martyr Maid here, who you might remember made headlines by going on Tucker Carlson and saying maybe World War II was a little more complicated than we thought, and maybe Churchill wasn't like this big, amazing human that you all thought, and caused a lot of hoopla amongst the self-described World War II expert crowd out there. That's this guy, historian. He said, there's no reason China should be our enemy. I agree. There's like we don't need enemies, but you know what's going to happen? You can feel it. You can feel the same thing I can feel. Ukraine's winding down. That big giant military industrial gravy train is winding down. Try and act surprised. Prediction time. When, oh no, something to replace that gets fired up. I'm old enough. I remember Iraq. Got to break that. Oh no, now we got to break Libya. Oh, now we got to break Syria. And once those breakages were no longer feasting moments for the system of militarization of the U.S. Budget and weaponry complex, they just move seamlessly on to the next thing. Ukraine has been one of the most fantastically wealthy, wealth-generating wars for those people. When that one winds down, the marketing divisions of these MIC companies, they're going to go out there and figure out how to whoop something up. And China would be a logical, obvious next thing. Unfortunately, getting involved in that kind of a peer adversary would probably be the complete undoing of everything we hold dear, our lives, our prosperity. I consider it a very bad idea. But why should China be our enemy? Why wouldn't you say, we have interests? They might not always agree. You have yours, we have ours. Let's do business. Let's find a way to negotiate. That would be what we would call normal politics. But he says here, people like Shapiro whip up the mob to try and make it a self-fulfilling prophecy. So Ben Shapiro is saying the CCP is our enemy. TikTok is a Chinese op. It's designed to manipulate Westerners into parroting CCP propaganda while gathering all their data. So Ben Shapiro is no longer a viable spokesmodel for anything as far as I'm concerned. He speaks to just one set of interests and one set of interests only, and not the American interests as far as I can tell. So with that said, if we really thought TikTok wasn't a healthy thing for our country, for our countrymen, we would do exactly what China did with things like TikTok. And they said, oh, because if you go to TikTok in China, you don't see people doing meaningless dances and cringy little challenges and just basically running soft versions of OnlyFans accounts on there. You go to China's TikTok and you see people playing cello and conducting science experiments and doing things because they've constrained it to say we want this our social media apps to give a positive, be a force of good for our youth. We could pass similar things here if we wanted to as a culture. Say, hey, we think this social media stuff should operate in our best interests, and we think children should be lionizing and following and emulating people who happen to be absolute superstars in their chosen professions, and that'd be great instead of just a wasteful dopamine purge. But leaving that aside, we're starting to see this whole thing, but the only people who want China to be our enemy actually profit from that one way or the other, directly, indirectly, however that breaks out. Okay. Well, here's the real reason I think many suspect is the TikTok ban by Congress is that people in one particular instance are talking about things like the Palestinian-Israeli peace, and it was very lopsided. People on TikTok were talking about, what was happening to Palestinians, and that's completely unacceptable. And that's why we saw Congress get suddenly excited about this thing, not because of its effect on our children here, but I believe because of this same situation going on with X as in TikTok. It's unapproved narrative. They can't have it where people freely exchange ideas, say whatever they want, get educated about those things, maybe change their opinions over time. Nah, Congress really only wants one point of view out there about things, and they are in agreement with our media companies that there should be an approved source of things. That all just changed under Trump. We're going to see that break down quite a bit. And by the way, on this particular topic here, seeing Pritzker of Illinois coming out saying, let there be no doubt, we will stand up for all our children and families. We will follow our state laws to protect the immigrant, not migrant, it's not immigrant communities that live, work, and thrive in Illinois. Know your rights and plan, says Governor Pritzker. To which I would say, welcome to Title 8, Section 1324. It is a felony to harbor illegal aliens. I think that's going to be an incredible battle as we see that come forward. So, at any rate, with that, those are my first thoughts here. I just wanted to get that pardon stuff out on the table. It's terrible. It's really awful what just happened there. Again, at the surface level, but more importantly, underneath that, the implication and the messaging that happens when Team Biden says, we ran this big corrupt thing. We wouldn't want to suffer any consequences of that, so we're just going to pardon ourselves for everything up to and including running illegal gain-of-function experiments, covering those up, that then caused billions of deaths, doing horrible things. They've just said, you know what, we're okay with doing horrible things to ourselves as long as it's for our side and our corrupt family office and our corrupt team and all of that. That's terrible. It is no good. And so that's why this isn't just something I'm willing to shrug past. I'm going to put my message out there. I'm going to put who knows what on the line. I'm just going to call it like I see it. This is unacceptable. And these people have to be held to account. So anything that is done to undo these pardons, whatever constitutional crisis has to arise in order to undo these pardons, let's do it. Let's go there, because this is unacceptable. This is not what the pardon was supposed to stand for. You were convicted of a crime. You showed appropriate contrition. You've done whatever mea culpas and atonements you had to do. And then, hey, we show some mercy with the clemency coming down the pike later. You don't give people blanket immunity for anything they might have done from January 1st, 2014 through to whenever. No. At a minimum, you have to get on a stand if you want that blanket immunity, and you have to explain to everybody what you did. And if you leave anything off that list, that's still fair game. So we're going to have to hear the complete list. This is an abuse of the system. And of course, that's exactly what Team Biden stands for. It's just one long continued abuse of the people of this country, of what it stands for, of our tax dollars, of our sense of propriety, of any remaining shreds of dignity or integrity that DC might have had left, all of that stuff. That's what just got exposed. It is really that awful. So sorry to have to share all that with you, but that's what I woke up to today, and that's what's been on my mind. So thanks very much for listening. Thanks to the Signal Hour. We're going to be back with more. I think I'm going to be traveling on Wednesday, so our next Signal Hour, if I can get to it, will be on Thursday. But there will be another one where I sit down with this, gel it a little bit more, and we go through more of it. So with that, thank you very much, everybody. Thanks, John. Appreciate that. And we will be back with you during our next Signal Hour again, not on Wednesday because I'll be in the air during the normal Signal Hour, so probably Thursday. With that, thanks, everybody. We'll be back next time. Thanks for listening, and thanks for being here, part of this Signal Hour. Bye for now.